Good morning, everybody. David Fisher from Immigration Chambers, founder and director of Immigration Chambers New Zealand Limited, specialist immigration firm here in Auckland, New Zealand. We are now in the third week of our coronavirus COVID-19 lockdown. Okay, so first things first, there are a few questions that keep coming up. We're fielding a lot of emails and inquiries about a few issues this week. One of those is the news or the announcements about possible economic scenarios as a result of this COVID-19 situation. So you might have seen throughout the news networks or your Facebook groups that people are posting about a possibility that the borders will be closed for 12 months. Now, just to clarify what this is about. So the government did publish what they call it like an economic scenarios paper, and in this paper they have outlined the possibility of certain scenarios in the economy, so certain things that may happen as a result of this lockdown. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to forecast what type of effect there's going to be, right? So whether there's going to be a 10% drop in GDP, whether there's going to be a 15% rise in unemployment, or this type of thing. So in doing so, they have outlined a number of possible scenarios. Many people have mistaken this as policy. This is not policy. This is not something that the government has announced as policy. This is simply something that a working group has gone through and tried to calculate as possible scenarios that could come up. And there are 5 scenarios. What they really are talking about is conjecture. They're trying to figure out what's going to happen. What types of problems could there be? What issues are coming up? What is the number that's going to be the economic numbers, the financial numbers, the fiscal numbers? What's really going to happen to the economy? Nobody actually knows. Now, this idea about the border closure for 12 months, we should still take this a little bit seriously. Now, the indication is that borders could be closed for 12 months to visitors. And we don't have clarification as to what that really means. What is a visitor? Is a visitor somebody who holds a visitor visa? Is a visitor somebody who is trying to visit their family, their partner? Or is it just a tourist? Are they considering that this might affect also the income of foreign students, offshore students who want to come and study here? Now, these are all things that just have not been announced yet. And we have to be patient and wait for this announcement. We are expecting announcements about whether or not we'll come out of this level 4 lockdown by Monday next week. We're eagerly awaiting further policy announcements about this potential long-term border closure. So let's just hold off for a while on that one and wait and see what comes out, because really the news that's been spread around is related to conjecture about possible economic outcomes. It's not about policy. Let's keep that in mind. Now, another thing that's been coming up with us this last week is people are asking, well, what do I do if I want to get this variation that is available for essential workers, health workers, people who are holding student visas to work in supermarkets or hospitals? So we've been informed just yesterday about this change in the actual instructions, the policy, and it's under E3.26 of the Immigration Operational Manual. They are allowing for immigration officers to grant variations of visas. Now, the key thing to note about this is that it's not an application that the worker needs to make. It's actually something that the employer needs to notify immigration about. And the government is going to allow this to happen online. There's going to be an online form. We haven't seen the form yet, but there will be an online form, and your employer is the one who goes into the online form and will notify about which workers, which staff are going to be working in various positions. So what my advice is that if you're not sure whether you fall under this variation option, and if you're not sure if you're in the right employment, you're probably not. And so what you should do is go and talk to your employer. If you're working and you think that your employer might be one of these employers, go and talk to them. Talk to your HR department, talk to your manager, somebody above you, your owner, and ask them what's happening here, because they will likely also know what to do and who to talk to and how to go about it. If you can receive a variation, it will be valid for, they mention here, 6 weeks after changing into level 2. So it's not forever, it's for a period of time which is limited to 6 weeks after reverting to level 2. Okay, Gurpreet Singh says, hi David. So just for everyone's benefit, there is actually a group now that's been created of Indians who are stranded, I suppose is the right word, back in India, whereas New Zealand is their home at the moment. They hold temporary visas and they found themselves for one reason or another back in India during the shutdown. So for those of you who don't know, the Indian government also went hard and went early. With 1 billion people and the conditions in India, the government decided that it would be very prudent to really just shut down the country, and they stopped all flights in and out for a period. So a lot of Indians or Indian nationals have found themselves back in India not able to fly to New Zealand before New Zealand fully went into lockdown as well. And there are people who hold visas who are now in all kinds of problems. Some of them are being told they're going to lose their job if they don't come back. Some of them are stuck now paying rent here in New Zealand plus back in India. It's really a horrible situation, and there's a build-up of interest and a petition growing on that side. Now, Gurpreet has been a good leader and trying to calm his people down. I would also say the same thing. I would say, look, everybody, I know you're worried, but we have to remember that there are the leaders up here in government. They're operating on a level that's well above our pay grade. They know things that we don't know. They have insight into what's happening out there on a much larger picture. Here we are in our little bubble looking at what's in front of us, but they are looking at the entire big picture. And sometimes it's really best just to be a little bit patient and to let them do their job. Although, yes, this petition is a good idea. Now, that's that scenario, that you really should be still earning your money if you're working the hours. In another scenario where you're not actually working and you're at home, but your employer has determined to keep you, and let's say they pay you less, which they're allowed to do. They're allowed to say, okay, 80% or even at the minimum, just the wage subsidy. Then it's a different story because you're not actually working. So this can affect your visa conditions because according to your visa conditions, it's supposed to be working. Now, the wage subsidy is classified as wages. So if they're passing on the wage subsidy to you as a minimum, that $585, less tax of course, this is classified as wages. You are being paid to keep the employment, but you are at home, so you're on a kind of a special leave. So what I've been advising people to do is just to make sure that they keep really good records, keep your communication with your employer by emails and text as much as possible, because there may come a time in the future where an immigration officer is looking back in the past and looking at that period of time while you were at home and getting paid less than your normal required hours, and it will need to be justified. So the conversations I've had with managers already about this point is that, look, let's keep in mind the principles of immigration law and employment law. So acting in good faith with your employer and following the conditions of your visa as much as practicable. Now, when it comes time to explain this to an immigration officer in the future, if you can, hand on your heart, say we did the right thing, we acted in good faith, we did everything that we could do, then it's likely an immigration officer is going to be lenient. They're going to interpret this in your favor because we are all stuck in this scenario. This one is the last one. Sheldon Brown asks, I'm on a talent accredited employer visa with a remuneration requirement of 55K. My employer has reduced my pay by 20% under the 55K threshold. How would immigration view this? Okay, so I have sort of touched on this earlier. Specifically, you need to really consider, like I said earlier, whether you're still working or not. So if you're still working 40 hours a week, but your employer has reduced your pay below the threshold, you're in breach of the conditions of your visa. It doesn't look good, and this is something that will need to be explained in the future. Is it temporary? Why was it done? What's the point of reducing it like that? However, if you're not working, then your reduction of 20% is likely to be fine because it's a kind of a special leave, right? You're not actually working. Or if your hours are reduced by 20% as well. So let's take the scenario where normally you work 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, and now you're working 4 days a week, 8 hours a day. So that's a 20% reduction in your hours, 20% reduction in your pay at the same time. Your effective hourly rate is still the same. So you meet the requirements, not a problem. 32 hours a week, $26.45 per hour still meets the requirements. The main point to keep in mind for situations like this, Sheldon, is, again, like I said, everything should be done in good faith with the employer. And if you find yourself in a technical breach of your visa conditions, namely that you are still working but you're getting paid below the requirement, then you should consider whether this breach is fair under all the circumstances. Is it fair and reasonable? Is it something that you have no choice in the matter, that it's done as a temporary measure to maintain the employer's sustainability? And if that's the case, immigration officers are likely to treat it with lenience. That's how I see it. Immigration law is not something that is strictly prescriptive, right? It's not simply a question of checking the boxes. Immigration officers have discretion. And like I've said in the last video, and like I mentioned here about employment law has this overarching duty of good faith. Immigration law has an overarching fundamental concept that is the grant of a visa is an act of discretion. And so immigration officers have that ability and authority to consider all of the surrounding circumstances of what's happened to you in the past and what's happening in the future. And it may be the case in most cases that there are going to be technical breaches during this lockdown that people are just going to have to explain very well. And so whether or not you need help to explain that is up to you. It could be the case that concerns come up with your future applications. It could be the case that it goes through smoothly. They'll be very lenient in that. Okay, so finally, just to wrap it up, look, I know there are a number of questions that I haven't got to yet. If I haven't answered your specific question, please look through the other questions and see if it's been liked by my assistant. It means that I've already answered it. You can have a look at the video. Sometimes we can mention what part of the video that's in. Otherwise, you can feel free to ask us directly through Facebook. You can send us a direct message. It's not possible for us to get to every comment and every question on the public postings, but if you send us a direct message, we'll always reply. We'll always respond, give us as much information as possible. During this lockdown period, we're available. We're not charging any money for these kinds of things. Once the lockdown's over and we go back to work, we go back to being very busy. And at that time, we may have to start booking in proper consultations, but we'll just see how we go. Meanwhile, everybody stay safe. Keep watching the news. Keep following us on Facebook. Yeah, enjoy your weekend. Hopefully we'll come out of this lockdown very soon. Ka kite ano.